Welcome to this episode of Insights with Ovationz. I am your host, Aaron Ellis. You can find me at aaronellisofficial.com, as well as all my social media is Aaron Ellis Official. Today, I am joined by Greg Zlevor. Now, Greg is a trusted consultant and advisor to Fortune 500 companies. He's an 8-time #1 best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and a philanthropist. Over the last 25 years, he's become a distinguished authority in executive leadership development and education. And as the founder and president of Westwood International, he's guided countless companies across 5 continents, empowering leaders to unparalleled success. For those of you in the know, he's also become he's a recent nobody. He's also a good dear friend of mine that I'm honored to have on the show today. Welcome, Greg.
Great to be here with you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know we have a lot to catch up on too, so we're going to try to keep it as focused as we can for the next 20 minutes. Now, let's talk about what you've been doing. You have a lot of experience in the realm of leadership development, and I know just from reading over some of just refreshing myself on you, I know that your organization, you've developed like 25,000 plus leaders. I'm curious on what you have found as far as efficiencies you're bringing in, because a lot of times I'm asked by clients like, well, what efficiencies is going to bring? How do we know this is going to work? Obviously, you have something dialed in to have done this for 25 years with over 25,000 leaders. So whatever that arises with you, I'd love to have you share.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that allow us to do what we do and to do it well. We take a lot of the research and work that's going on now in terms of emotional intelligence, communication, influence, persuasion, etc., running meetings, especially remote teams, and we create custom programs for intact teams or groups who need to be using those skills and talents more efficiently. So that's one piece. Second, we help a collective do that. So as an example, last week we were at a large multi-billion-dollar company. We were training their upper-level management to become executives. And after the 3-day experience, we got a message from one of the people that said, look, I thought this was going to be like a regular leadership program. And wow, was I surprised. This is completely different. My life is going to change. And essentially what that means is we're giving people simple tools and practices that they can work on right away and apply, can change the way they approach their work, their connections, their relationships, their meetings, that make things easier, more productive, and get more out of it with less stress and less turmoil. And so that's really what we do. And we craft it for that particular culture, team, or person. So we do mostly custom work.
I love that. I pulled something out of what I was reading. You mentioned emotional intelligence. And what I pulled out was that what you do with Westwood, and you personally do, is you emphasize emotional intelligence and foster community, all while tackling real business challenges. The funny thing to me is when I read that, I had to read twice. I'm like, well, emotional intelligence and community are business challenges. Yet the way you phrased it, I was like, oh, it's almost meeting people where they're at and the paradigm that they might be thinking in to bridge them into these things called emotional intelligence. So can you talk about how you bridge that gap and why it's important and why community is important?
Well, see, the thing is, right now, it's best for people to be working on these skills while doing real work. And so what we have people do is work on specific projects. So just referring back to that project, the group we were with last week, we asked the leadership team, the senior leadership team, the CEO on down, to create some key strategic projects that these small groups could work on while they're practicing these skills and tools. And so we have people doing actual work. And in this situation, we had actually coaches observing them, helping them, giving them feedback in real time on what they could do differently, better, or more. And that kind of combination, real work, real issues and challenges internally, you put those two together, and the results are pretty dramatic.
I love that. So you're actually not just, again, one of the things I've heard too in just my research, that you're not just speaking to this organization, you're speaking with them. You're actually getting them in action, which from my experience is a key factor to integration. It's a key factor to change. So it's not like just a workshop where they're sitting and taking notes. They're actually working their own workshop. Is that a true way to say it?
Absolutely. And a lot of our work is designing the process or flow, putting in some content, but then facilitating their learning and growth. That's most of what we do. And I think it flips the equation on its head, because a lot of, and really some of our competitors are the larger universities in the world or some of the larger firms. A lot of times what their approach is to lead with the content, their books, their expertise.
Right.
We don't do that. We do at times add that high-end content, but we lead with our facilitation, people doing it, interacting with it, and then giving them real-time feedback in the midst of it. And so our emphasis is highly, like, the best content we have that's interactive and proven, but then facilitating people's interaction with it and involvement with it. That's really our forte.
Wow, that's well put. Now, do you encounter, and I haven't encountered this as much in my own work as I did in the past, but do you encounter companies who are very statistical and results oriented, meaning they want to understand how what you do is actually going to help the bottom line, help their revenue? How is they going to tie this to revenue? Do you encounter that? And if you do, how have you helped bridge that gap to show them that what you do and what you bring to that organization is actually absolutely going to affect those two things?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we do. And there are many different ways to do that. Now, in a large organization, like some of our clients have over 100,000 employees when we're training their leaders. And to say we move the revenue needle on a leadership development program is almost impossible to absolutely predict and show. But we can show places where the needle has moved. Like, as an example, we had one client who in a couple particular key areas of the company, they needed to go outside and hire 90% of their next set of leaders, their executives. That's very expensive.
Yeah.
In addition to it being very expensive, when everyone in the organization is seeing all the hires coming from outside, it lowers morale. So that was a big problem for this company. So we designed a specific program for them to develop the skills that people needed in order to become VPs and EVPs. We ran that program for 3 years, and within 3 years, we were able to completely flip the script. They went from hiring 90% outside to hiring 90% inside. Now, in that situation, it was pretty easy to calculate. It was 300,000 plus for each executive that they need to hire from the outside.
Really?
By the time if they used a hiring firm, it was even more. By the time they trained that person got up to speed and was producing, it was easily 300,000. Well, when you look at, they were trying to promote 10 to 20 people per year. It was literally in the millions of dollars that was saved for them. So in that situation, it was easy to show, here's the needle that was moved. There are other places where like some of the projects are relatively easy. We had one client who found a $450 million market because of the projects and the work that the teams did while we were training them and showing them how to do more innovation, creativity, and running better meetings, right? Wow. So that was pretty easy. Like, that was very dramatic and significant. So those types of situations, it's possible. The second place to look is, depending on what the client signs up for, we can have people pick very specific behaviors that align directly with the mission, vision, or values of the company. And we can ask that person to pick that particular behavior, give them a feedback team, and have that feedback team indicate whether that person has gotten better or worse with that particular behavior. And we can show that from third-party influence, third-party surveys, whether that person is getting better or not. That significantly moves the needle. Now, you asked the question, does that move the needle on income, on sales, on whatever EBITDA, whatever the key metric is? That's up to the company. But we can specifically show measurable change to people in areas that matter that we design up front. And oftentimes we can show dollar savings as well, though it does get tricky depending on what you want to measure. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Actually, you answered it very thoroughly. So, and you gave some actual real life examples. So I'm sure on it, like I know with me, like those examples arise when I'm in the moment talking to somebody. And with 25,000 leaders developed, I'm sure you have a lot of stories, a lot of experience, personal experience with the organization to reference. So Very, very well said. Another thing I pulled out that I'm curious on your take on this, just because it's somewhat, I'm not saying it's an overused word, but I wanna understand what you mean when you say mindful leadership. So mindfulness and mindful leadership. What does that mean to you in Westwood?
Yeah, so mindful leadership is just the leadership that brings more awareness and less triggered or less, I don't want to use the word agenda, because everyone has an agenda and agenda is important, but brings less triggeredness and more curiosity to the moment of what's going on and what's happening. So as an example, what I find in one way I measure whether a leader is more emotionally intelligent or not is how they handle what happens to them. A leader who is not as emotionally intelligent will oftentimes be triggered, find themselves expressing out of or living or working out of emotions that are not healthy for both their participants, their particular team, or their peers. Whereas an emotionally intelligent leader is more likely to react to a situation when they get what they don't want or they don't get what they do want in a graceful way that leads to a better outcome. They actually put themselves in a more resourceful position. And so part of our goal is helping people to work on the inside, or what sometimes I call behind the curtain, so that they can have the skills to use the tools that we teach from a negotiation perspective or a running meeting perspective or a presentation perspective. And we teach all of those skills. Like, what does it mean to run a great meeting? Here are the key tools and the findings. What does it mean to give a presentation? Here's the way you do it to be more influential or persuasive. What does it mean to build a team? Here are the dynamics you look at. Here's the things you need to facilitate, right? All of those types of tools which we train and teach, they're so much more powerful if the person is working on themselves behind the curtain. What they think, how they feel, how they show up in a meeting, that presence. And so people have to work on both sides. They have to develop the tools and the techniques, but at the same time work on what's on the inside. And that's why when we craft things, we think it's important to work with people from an interactive perspective versus just a teach them perspective. It's so critical, and why we have such a great impact on the participants that show up, because they actually get it in their bones and in their muscles by the time we're done.
Wow. I love it. I want to take this mindful leadership a little further into a current issue that I've done a little studying on in the recent times. And it has to do with layoffs and massive layoffs. And there's been a narrative, and obviously I take it with a grain of salt, and I look at the energy of the narratives when it's about complaining and it's negative. But there were some things that I read that was actually really interesting where they were giving an objective account on how they were laid off or how they were let go, and the reasons they were given didn't even apply to them, because they hadn't been in the company long enough for some of the reasons they were giving. So I don't necessarily need to go into the specifics of it, but I'm curious on if you have worked with companies to help them on those kind of massive layoffs or those kind of shifts in leadership that also I've seen it happen where there's an acquisition, right? You have two CEOs now, you have two vice presidents now. Like, have you worked with companies to do that in a more mindful way? Or if you haven't, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, and I'll give you two examples. So there was a car company. The car company is going nameless, but I was brought in by a car company because they purchased another large company. Both name brand, on TV commercial brands, right? Big brand companies. And in the meeting, we started talking about different issues they had in terms of bringing their systems together. And in this particular meeting, it was about their compensation systems and how they were going to go about it, how they wanted to merge it. And about an hour, it was a 2-hour meeting. About an hour into the meeting, I asked, wait a minute, who's from this company and who's from this company? And everyone from company A said, oh, it's just company A right now. We're going to bring in company B later.
Oh.
And I said, exactly. I said, oh. I said, well, let me tell you a couple challenges, right? And I began to lay out the challenges they're going to run into if they don't begin to be more transparent and candid in a partnership, and how they're going to create a system that's going to create more problems for them long term. And we spent the next hour talking about that dynamic. And the challenge is people don't want to give up control and power.
Mm-hmm.
They just simply don't. It's frightening to do that. But the fact of the matter is, if they don't share the control and power, then they get more resistance. And more resistance creates more problems and friction long term. So you either pay now or you pay later. And in a lot of situations, a lot of our consulting and work is helping people to learn to pay now so that they don't have to pay later and they can start growing sooner. Because I can tell you that particular company ended up dealing with that resistance for several years. And it didn't serve them well. But it's the choice they made, and they unfortunately had to, they lost a lot. They lost a lot of traction because of it. But it's part of our work. Yeah.
So helping them learn how to pay now so they don't have to pay later. I'm sure that brings in everything else we've talked about, how, yes, there's skill sets they need to develop, but there's also some inner work that's going to have to be done on those people that are going to be deploying those skill sets. Like, that's a really interesting on what you shared. Now, that was speaking like towards a merger and acquisition, but have you done any work or have any thoughts on the mass layoffs that have been happening and how that could be done in a more mindful way, or the leaders could be more mindful in those interactions?
Yeah, two things. One, if the work hasn't been done up front, it's really tough to do it well at the moment. So as an example, if the company has been working with those people to help them develop and grow all the way along, and the company or the enterprise has shown true concern for the employees, when you get to that point, you have more leeway to craft a creative opportunity moving forward.
Yeah.
Whether that's some type of severance or some type of work from home or some type of reduced position or moving to another part of the company. I mean, every situation is a bit different.
Right.
That's the first thing. Get the work, do the work all the time. So when you have to do the really tough parts of the work, it's easier. Not easy, but easier. Second, in the midst of that, there are a lot of companies who take the approach, we're just going to announce it and have people walk out. And here's the severance, here's what's going on, here's what's happening. And sometimes in very drastic situations, you need to be that drastic. But for the most part, most companies have warning signs months in advance and can be checking their cash flow and their process and their market to know what's coming. I mean, AI is one example here.
Right.
And companies that are in that spot, what are you doing to help your people either develop the skills you need, giving them a runway to develop those skills, or providing a softer landing and having the process go in such a way that if they want to come back or you want them back, they can. And I can tell you right now, converts, people who leave a company and then come back, end up oftentimes being the best, most loyal, passionate employees you can have.
Wow.
For companies to create that process where that can happen is really important. And it takes a lot of creativity, but it has to be going on over mostly a longer period of time than just in the moment, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. I love that answer. That was very well said. Now, we only got a couple minutes left. I'd love to have everybody here. I'd love to hear, the personal side of Greg. Who's Greg on the personal side? Family man, kids? What do you love to do?
Yeah, I mean, I love meditating. Spend every morning doing that. In a fantastic relationship and marriage. I'm very thankful for that. Have 5 children under my umbrella and spend time with them as often as I can. And then just continuing to learn. I think the other thing that's been exciting, Aaron, is this group Hope Makers that we've started, which is very exciting. It's a global group of coaches, trainers, facilitators, industry experts who come together and talk about how can we make a bigger difference in the world, mostly from a corporate team enterprise side, but we have authors and all kinds of folks who pitch in there. So that's very exciting. That group is probably what I spend most of my time on, even though it's financially not rewarding, but it's just emotionally so rewarding to be a part of this group. So that's the big thing. Yeah.
Love it, man. I love that. So in this last, little tiny bit of time we have, is there some final thought or that you absolutely would leave people with, or the final thing that arises in you to share?
Yeah, I think this. there's often a misconception that when you become more mindful or more present or more curious, that you're giving up your position or strength. And part of the teaching is you're actually doing just the opposite. As you become more mindful and present and get clear about what you want, but give more space for the other side to be what they need and want, you're actually creating more strength inside because you have more content and security about who you are, where you stand, and why you stand there. And second, if you give the space for the other side to speak, to share their position, to find out the reasons behind their position, it gives you more opportunity to create solutions and strategic partnerships to move forward in more resourceful and respectful ways. And it's a training that goes against the ego oftentimes, which ironically is what put a lot of people in the position to negotiate to that position. But like Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
That your thinking can now get in your way. And so that's part of what we teach. How do you be more curious, be more mindful, be more present, but be clear on your position, and then have ways, techniques, and methods to craft more strategic partnerships moving forward so you and whoever you're working with become more resourceful.
Perfectly said. Perfect way to end. Greg, I really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing some value with everybody. So thank you very much for being on.
My pleasure, Aaron. Love talking about this, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been another episode with Insights with Ovationz. My name is Aaron Ellis. We've been speaking with Greg Zlevor. If you want to learn more about Ovationz or Greg, head over to ovationz.com, and we will see you next time. Thanks.